Why do you work for Santa Fe County?
For my family.
For your safety.
For you.
For my community.
For the public.
For the community.
For the retirement.
To serve my community.
For my family.
For the outdoors.
David Crispin with the United States Marine Corps.
Jacqueline Beam, 519th Military Intelligence, U.S. Army.
Matthew Hernandez, United States Navy.
Keith Claxton, United States Navy.
Paul Portillo, United States Navy.
Robert Griego, U.S. Navy, Operations Specialist.
Chris Oakley, United States Navy, United States Marine Corps, State of New Mexico Army National Guard.
Melinda Medlin, United States Army.
Norman Aragod, U.S. Army National Guard.
Raven Nieto, United States Army.
Oscar Martin Lopez, United States Marine Corps.
Martin, United States Army, retired.
Valentino Baca, United States Marine Corps.
Jeff Folgate, United States Air Force.
Kenneth Quintana, United States Army, and as well as New Mexico National Guard, combined service 24 years.
Santa Fe County is hiring. Every Tuesday, Public Works holds a rapid hire event at 102 Grant Avenue at 8:30 a.m. Also, the Correctional Facility holds a rapid hire event every Tuesday at 9 a.m. That is at 28 Camino Justicia. We have great jobs, great pay, and great benefits. Come work with us. Why do you work for Santa Fe County?
For my family.
For your safety.
For you.
For my community.
For the public.
For the community.
For the retirement.
To serve my community.
For my family.
For the outdoors.
David Crispin with the United States Marine Corps.
Jacqueline Beam, 519th Military Intelligence, U.S. Army.
Matthew Hernandez, United States Navy.
Keith Claxton, United States Navy.
Paul Portillo, United States Navy.
Robert Griego, U.S. Navy, Operations Specialist.
Chris Oakley, United States Navy, United States Marine Corps, State of New Mexico Army National Guard.
Melinda Medlin, United States Army.
Norman Aragod, U.S. Army National Guard.
Raven Nieto, United States Army.
Oscar Martin Lopez, United States Marine Corps.
Martin, United States Army, retired.
Valentino Baca, United States Marine Corps.
Jeff Folgate, United States Air Force.
Kenneth Quintana, United States Army, and as well as New Mexico National Guard. Combined service 24 years.
Santa Fe County is hiring. Every Tuesday, Public Works holds a rapid hire event at 102 Grant Avenue at 8:30 a.m. Also, the correctional facility holds a rapid hire event every Tuesday at 9 a.m. That is at 28 Camino Justicia. We have great jobs, great pay, and great benefits. Come work with us. Why do you work for Santa Fe County?
For my family.
For your safety.
For you.
For my community.
For the public.
For the community.
For the retirement.
To serve my community.
For my family.
For the outdoors.
David Crispin with the United States Marine Corps.
Jacqueline Beam, 519th Military Intelligence, U.S. Army.
Matthew Hernandez, United States Navy.
Keith Claxton, United States Navy.
Paul Portillo, United States Navy.
Robert Griego, U.S. Navy, Operations Specialist.
Chris Oakley, United States Navy, United States Marine Corps, State of New Mexico Army National Guard.
Melinda Medlin, United States Army.
Norman Aragod, U.S. Army National Guard.
Raven Nieto, United States Army.
Oscar Martin Lopez, United States Marine Corps.
Martin, United States Army, retired.
Valentino Baca, United States Marine Corps.
Jeff Folgate, United States Air Force.
Kenneth Quintana, United States Army, and as well as New Mexico National Guard. Combined service 24 years.
Santa Fe County is hiring. Every Tuesday, Public Works holds a rapid hire event at 102 Grant Avenue at 8:30 a.m. Also, the correctional facility holds a rapid hire event every Tuesday at 9 a.m. That is at 28 Camino Justicia. We have great jobs, great pay, and great benefits. Come work with us. Why do you work for Santa Fe County?
For my family.
For your safety.
For you.
For my community.
For the public.
For the community.
For the retirement.
To serve my community.
For my family.
For the outdoors.
David Crispin with the United States Marine Corps.
Jacqueline Beam, 5
and what they're anticipated to be over a 5-year planning horizon in terms of capital outlay funds, as well as provide you with staff's initial recommendations relative to both new projects as well as additional funding for those projects that already have some budget available. So I want to start at the outset by thanking Vaughn, Leandro Cordova, as well as Brian Snyder, and all department directors that have capital-related projects. A lot of folks put a lot of effort into compiling the information that we're going to go over today, as well as scoping and ranking potential new projects and putting together these initial recommendations. So I wanted to acknowledge all of their hard work. Sam in budget as well, in terms of his very meticulous attention to detail in tracking a lot of different resources. So with that by way of introductions, what we hoped to go over or achieve from today's meeting was to discuss what our available resources are, to review the general capital outlay process, and spend some amount of time talking specifically about infrastructure investment in Sustainable Development Area 1, as well as the Community College Plan Development District in particular, as it does form the basis of 2 specific recommendations that staff has relative to new projects. We also wanted to go over our high-level recommendations. Again, be happy to answer any questions along the way, but this is very much an informational and study meeting, and we're not asking for any particular direction at the conclusion of today's meeting.
Madam Chair Schaefer, I believe that Commissioner Bustamante might be online, or at least is trying to get online. Okay, so I'm not sure.
Shall we wait, Madam Chair, until she does?
I think we should go ahead because I don't think she's going to log on until 4 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So wanted to highlight, what are the significant sources of capital dollars, which, you could think of both as new projects as well as significant upgrades to existing facilities, such as a re-roof project or a re-stucco project. At the county level, most significant are general obligation and revenue bonds, which is one is a property tax supported source of capital and represents new money. Revenue bonds, you're really getting an advance payment of future revenue streams. We have capital outlay gross receipts tax, as well as an increment of so-called hold harmless gross receipts tax that is dedicated to capital expenditures and maintenance expenditures. We also have the county general fund, state appropriations, congressionally directed spending, and community project funding at the federal level, and then federal and state grants. In terms of recurring sources of revenue for capital and significant maintenance expenses, the 2 most significant are our capital outlay gross receipts tax, as well as our hold harmless gross receipts tax. So the figures on this slide show you our estimates for the next 5 fiscal years of what we believe we will receive in terms of revenue from those sources. And so the purpose of this slide is to give you a sense of new dollars that we can anticipate bringing in on a annual basis to fund future projects that may not be funded this go around or might only be partially funded this go around. So in other words, if you're doing a preliminary engineering report or you're studying escape routes, what have you, well, that sets the stage for a future ask against this revenue, and we just wanted to give you a sense of what that is and what you can anticipate coming in over the next 5-year planning horizon. In terms of our significant non-recurring resources, and I should stop for a second. The list of potential sources, it wasn't exhaustive. I was attempting to highlight the most significant ones. We have a utilities enterprise fund, for example, that can be used to fund capital projects to a certain extent. It's not set up currently, the revenue structure and the rate structure, to be fully self-sustaining in terms of actually paying for all the capital needs of the utility, but nonetheless, it is a source of resources within limits. And again, I mentioned that as one specific that was not called out, and that was due in large measure to its size. In terms of non-recurring resources, first, there is approximately $21.8 million in uncommitted and unrestricted fund balance in the Capital Outlay Gross Receipts Tax Fund. There's approximately $14.4 million of uncommitted and unrestricted fund balance in the hold harmless gross receipts tax revenue that I was alluding to. We also have several pots of uncommitted bond funds, $1.8 million in investment income from bond proceeds that could be allocated to capital projects, $539,000 that could be allocated to fire and public safety facilities, and then approximately $2,258 that we could use for one stripe on a road from uncommitted bond funds. There was also a one-time distribution from the federal government of local assistance and tribal consistency funds of approximately $1 million. We have some opioid settlement funds that could be used for capital to fund related to opioid substance abuse treatment and prevention. And then finally, we have some accumulated uncommitted fund balances in our public safety operations funds, which, although they're a denominated operations fund, because the source of those funds are largely general fund distributions, they could in fact be used for capital expenditures. For the most part, I would focus in terms of available resources on everything above the public safety uncommitted fund balances. Not only are those limited to public safety expenditures, but we have several projects that we're anticipating that would draw down upon those fund balances fairly rapidly.
Manager Schaefer.
Yes.
Commissioner Hamilton has a question.
You might have been on the way to answering it, but uncommitted fund balances means they're not finally committed to specific projects, but that doesn't mean there aren't projects that have been. What does that mean?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that question. Uncommitted means that they have not been allocated to another project. So uncommitted and unrestricted, there's a technical nuance that I'll get through, but that means that they're available to be budgeted now for a new project or an existing project.
So we have not contemplated them in previous budgeting to particular projects. It's not that they're not spent. These have not been committed yet.
That is correct.
Okay.
They are not earmarked. They're not associated with a particular project. When we go over the list of actually partially funded projects, you will see that it is a substantial amount of money. I believe it's approximately $197 million, which is already on the books in terms of funds that have been committed to specific projects. So when I use the term uncommitted, that means this money is available to either fund a new project that has no funding associated with it, or to provide additional resources for a project that already has partial funding for it.
Okay, that sounds great.
Did that answer your question,
It did,
Commissioner?
definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I wanted to briefly talk about the capital budget development process. Capital project ideas come, from a variety of sources, including county commissioners, other county elected officials, county staff, the community, and of course legislators, as the state goes through its own capital outlay process. In that, as you are all aware, we sometimes receive appropriations for projects that aren't on any of our list. So the ideas come from a lot of different sources. We do have a defined process for the scoping of projects, as well as the ranking of those projects that we go through on at least an annual basis. And that scoping and ranking process not only helps to define the county's capital budget over a 5-year implementation window, but it also is the groundwork for the ICIP process that we will be working on throughout the summer and into the fall in preparation for the legislative session. As I indicated in our goals for today's presentation, I did want to spend a fair amount of time talking about the Sustainable Development Area 1, and more particularly the Community College District, as there are two significant projects that relate to these principles that were adopted as part of the Sustainable Land Development Code. Generally speaking, the Sustainable Land Development Code, puts forth the concept that within SDA 1, there is an expectation that adequate public facilities presently exist or are planned, budgeted, or reasonably available, such that development may generally proceed immediately. To the extent that isn't the case, the SLDC does allow for developers to advance public facilities with the potential recoupment from subsequent development, but that subsequent recoupment is not guaranteed and is limited to 20 years. So as you think about building out that infrastructure that would become the county's, as a developer, you have to be thinking, am I going to get repaid? On what time frame am I going to get repaid? And you're going to be factoring that into your overall financial decisions as to whether or not your project is viable. With regard to SDA 1 and development in the area, when those assumptions don't exist, you potentially have development that is delayed or doesn't happen at all because it is cost prohibitive. The Northeast-Southeast connector is a prime example of that. There are several developments that received preliminary plat approval or other discretionary approvals from the board that were specifically contingent upon the construction of the Northeast-Southeast connector. So again, those developments weren't in a position to move forward until that backbone public facility or infrastructure was provided. And as we talk in a few slides, requiring development to fully bear the cost of public facilities that are necessary for that to be sustainable can be quite cost prohibitive in today's construction environment and the costs that are being charged for various infrastructure. With regard to the community college district specifically, as the board is aware, that is one of our primary designated growth areas. It generally establishes a minimum, not a maximum, but a minimum density of 3.5 dwelling units per acre, while at the same time preserving 50% of total land area for development. Minor and major subdivisions are generally required to connect to county sewer and water. And those connection costs, again, can be quite substantial given the current state of our utility system. Having significant residential development in the community college district supports potentially other goals that the county has. Number one, that's where we're going to get any significant growth in housing stock is going to be in the community college and in the rest of SDA 1. You're going to have employment and gross receipts tax during construction. Utility expansion charges can recoup some of the county's upfront investment in at least water and sewer infrastructure as that development is built out. And in addition, you'll be taking what is generally raw land and seeing it converted as it's developed into significant new property tax value, which provides a recurring revenue stream in property tax revenue as you go forward. In addition, the cost and uncertainty of advancing backbone infrastructure can be prohibitive as development is looking, again, at the cost of advancing public facilities. So with that by way of overview, we started with looking at some things that, based upon commissioner feedback and direction during the budget process and other factors we thought would likely come off the top, if you will. First, we promised that we would bring forward a plan to facilitate the electrification of the county fleet. As the board knows, we have applied for a significant grant that would cover a lot of these costs. If that grant doesn't materialize, however, we are suggesting that we put aside $1.5 million, which should support approximately 5 level 3 ultra-fast charging stations, which would be the type of infrastructure that I think you would need if you're going to try and electrify, law enforcement vehicles or vehicles that you're anticipating are going to charge significant distances over the course of a day and may need to be recharged in a short period of time as opposed to overnight. And again, $1.5 million would allow for approximately 5 such ultra-fast charging stations, which again would be a significant starting point in terms of spreading those out across the county to support the electrification of the county fleet. We have offered as part of settlement discussions related to annexation to contribute $1.5 million to drainage improvements along West Alameda. That would be a potential contractual commitment, and we're just budgeting that on the front end. There is in one of our attachments approximately $775,000 for what are tentatively scored as maintenance projects. That would include some additional money for existing maintenance projects, as well as an additional $250,000 for maintenance of public safety housing units, and $25,000 for a space utilization and needs assessment at the First Judicial District Court. Judge Brian Beachide is in the house. I can't believe I said that out loud, but I did. And available to answer any questions relative to what we may be able to anticipate going forward. But Judge Beachide reached out to me and to PJ and Brian wanting to plan proactively for potential expansion or other solution to anticipated and existing space needs at the First Judicial District Court. And so this $25,000 is a way for us to work collaboratively with the court to actually analyze what their current space is, how it's being utilized, and what those needs might be. It's a building block for a future potential ask, either an expansion of the existing site or a potential different solution altogether. But that's where that $25,000 came from. And again, it grew out of our conversation with Chief Judge Beachide concerning what they're anticipating and what they're experiencing now relative to space constraints. And then just a plug of a number for unanticipated contingencies as well as unanticipated maintenance projects. In terms of our overall recommendations, and the attachments to this presentation provides additional detail on much of this, which I'll ask Leandro and Brian to go over in a second. We are recommending approximately $32 million of additional funding for projects that are underway or already have projects associated with them. That ranges from the Pojoaque Basin Regional Water System at over $8 million to $700,000, I believe, for sewer projects in Agua Fria, to additional funds for road paving projects to allow those to be completed with contracted resources as opposed to the county's own resources. We'll go over those project by project, but when you sum it all up, it comes up to about $32 million and change. We're also recommending that we augment previously completed projects to help make them fully functional, but also maximize their utility for our staff, specifically the Santa Fe Water Reclamation Facility. Right now, it currently lacks an office or a testing lab, which we will need and do need as we move forward. $500,000 would help address that hardened building need in the long run. In the short run, it's not on the capital project list because we can do it with additional resources. We would be using other portable buildings to meet that need while that permanent office space is constructed. But again, it's a significant, albeit relatively small in the scope of things, investment for our workforce and for the important work that they are doing and will be doing at the reclamation facility at the state penitentiary. We mentioned, and I gave an overview relative to some core infrastructure in SDA 1, which could facilitate future sustainable development, which would provide both future recurring revenue as well as increased housing stock. Those two projects are, number one, an extension of College Drive to the northeast, I guess it would actually be the southeast, connector, including conduit, and I didn't list out here, but that would include conduit as well as a water line that would increase redundancy and water quality in the entire community college district. And then in addition, there is the sewer line that is planned to run from Richards Avenue all the way to, in essence, the Abajo lift station via the Calibre subdivision. And as it currently stands, we have $2 million in general obligation bond or anticipated bond resources for this project. The total estimated cost by the developer is approximately $6 million, which on 250 residential lots is a pretty steep ask in terms of passing those costs along to those individual property owners in order to pay for development that really would be the backbone sewer development within the entire community college as it relates to county-provided wastewater service. In addition, when we look at public safety, there is a first-year cost of a public radio system project of $2.5 million, which would be funded from those accumulated fund balances in the law enforcement fund and the fire fund. and then a handful of projects in the adult detention facility running at approximately $265,000 in total, which again would be funded from the Corrections Operations Fund. There were several sustainability-related initiatives. There could also somewhat be scored as infrastructure. First, there were two separate asks from the Sustainability Division of the Community Development Department to support the continuing electrification and conservation upgrades to county buildings, totaling approximately $2.23 million. There's a preliminary engineering report for a potential Tesuque Valley wastewater treatment facility, $250,000 to scope out what that project could look like and what those costs might entail if we were able to work with potential partners in the region, including Tesuque Pueblo as well as the Santa Fe Opera, to pool resources. But this would be the county's initial contribution to put more dollars to that effort in terms of determining what that cost might look like and what the overall lay, if you will, of the various wastewater lines might look like as a starting point for more detailed conversations. In addition, additional funding for transfer of development rights from prioritized county open space. Finally, in terms of high level things that I would draw your attention to, the proposed additions include $8,260,000 for the Pojoaque Basin Regional Water System. That's part of the $32 million that I alluded to earlier. That would fully fund today's dollars and not assuming any additional indexing, which is not an assumption that's going to hold, but that would get us to the full amount that we anticipate right now the county's contributions to the Pojoaque Basin Regional Water System will be with indexing as it exists today. So I believe we've contributed a little bit more than $9 million to the Bureau of Reclamation at this point, and we estimate that our additional contribution will be in the range of a total of 17.4. And so this $8.2 million would at least cover that additional contribution to the federal government. In addition, we're requesting that $250,000 be appropriated or budgeted for the Pojoaque Basin Regional System for a preliminary engineering report and a financial analysis, so that we can, again, further explore the idea of an interconnection between the Pojoaque Basin Regional Water System and the Santa Fe Basin Regional Water System for future decision-making purposes. We'd like to have a better understanding of the feasibility, but also the estimated cost of such an interconnect. But at the same time, we also want to do a financial analysis of the various alternatives so that the board can make an informed decision of amongst alternatives as to where to invest what will be not insubstantial dollars, regardless of whether funds are allocated to that interconnect or potentially to other distribution lines. So I didn't have a chance to summarize all of this, but I will for you, if not yet today, then tomorrow morning. When you add everything up in terms of the available current resources, leaving aside the Public Safety Operation Fund uncommitted balances, and then you subtract from that everything that I just went over, you're approximately at $12 million of available resources that county staff is not recommending that we budget at this point in time. And there are a couple of different reasons for that, but ultimately that's a decision for the Board of County Commissioners. First, as you know, we're in the midst of the ICIP process, and so that's a way in which we get potential projects from the community as well as other sources. And we thought it prudent to at least preserve some funding to potentially support those additional projects in whole or in part. In addition, having some capacity left does provide a source for contingencies that would exceed any project-specific contingencies. Don't want to sound like a Chicken Little, but when you look at the increased project costs that we've been experiencing, it bears, I guess, emphasizing that hopefully the worst is behind us, but we've never been in such an inflationary environment, I think, as we have been, or at least in living or our working memory, as we are in now. And Brian, if you could maybe, if I can put you on the spot, just go over what the costs for the Northeast-Southeast connector were over the last 2 years in terms of where we were to where we are now in terms of what that project looks like.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, just ballpark numbers. Our current project is approved now and under construction and moving along very successfully is in the neighborhood of about $21 million. When the project started early on, I mean, the project's been around for 15, 20 years. Early on, I came across project files where, 10 years ago, the project cost was estimated to be $5 million. And we took the project across the finish line largely because of New Mexico DOT partnership with us on TPF funding, where we got somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think we got $4.7 million this last year, as well as an additional several million dollars the previous year. So, they really helped us get across the finish line, helped us fill some of that gap, and make this project a successful project. But that's just a representation of, what we're up against from a cost standpoint, cost increase standpoint, and though we've seen some material costs stabilize, we've also seen, because of staffing shortages, the cost of staff increase. So we haven't seen a dramatic shift in costs. I think PJ would tell us that square footage-wise, when you're building a new building, those costs have come down a little bit, but at the same time, they're still, at high levels. I think in the neighborhood of about $500 a square foot is what we were bidding at for the community center. So it's still rather expensive.
Thank you for that, Brian. And again, that's just a representative example of, the unknowns in terms of future cost increases. And so having some unbudgeted capacity to help fill additional gaps as they materialize seems prudent in terms of allowing projects to actually be completed. In addition, and on the other end of the spectrum, having some cash on hand, does help in the event in the event that anticipated revenues don't actually materialize. The board's well aware of the potential downside risk in our gross receipts tax revenue, given various recessionary forecasts. That also allows us, again, by reserving some capacity in terms of cash resources to, prepare for, those known future needs that we have on the horizon. Some of what I've listed here, relate specifically to things that would be funded from those operating uncommitted fund balances in law enforcement, fire, and corrections. But that's, again, why we're not anticipating or recommending that those be drawn down at this point in time to fund a lot of different things, because we do anticipate that we will need that for significant projects in the future. Having uncommitted fund balance, has benefits in the interim as it relates to bond ratings and the like. And then finally, there are constraints in terms of our ability to expend and implement projects. And putting more projects on the books doesn't necessarily translate into more projects getting completed, but also reserving some capacity would allow for additional ability to augment some of our resources in terms of contract project management and in other areas. So with that, by way of overview, I'm going to turn it over to Leandro and to Brian, primarily to talk about our currently funded projects and what we're recommending in terms of dollars to either fund immediate funding gaps, meaning we anticipate spending this money in a reasonable amount of time in the future, or because we're anticipating large future contractual commitments that we feel that we need to plan for now in order to meet those contractual commitments.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. So one of the exercises we undertook as we started our capital budgeting was to take a good look at everything that we already had some funding attached to, all the number of projects that were out there. And part of that exercise was kind of prioritizing and going through looking at what projects are currently being either constructed or are very close to being constructed, and we're ready to do that. The next group of them would be projects that are probably in the design phase or pre-design or close to being completed in their design to determine how much we're going to have to fund to complete those projects. I had another group of projects that are kind of either stalled for some reason or the money is not necessarily needed for the same purpose. We may change scopes, things like that. And then the last group are projects that are basically completed that we would like to close out, and if there's any small balances, we'd move those to a project that currently is being constructed so that we could expend those. So the green, I apologize for the colors. I needed to get all these colors straight for me to be able to go through this list of almost 100 projects, and as you heard Manager Schaefer say, almost $200 million. So the green, as I mentioned, what's current, what our Public Works team are working on right now for the most part, and just that first tranche of projects equals about $80 million, 80.5 roughly. We have a gap identified in that group of about $4 million, and that's what Manager Schaefer was talking about filling, so that we can complete those projects, get them out of the way. But those projects alone are what take up most of our staff capacity, and I'll actually let Brian elaborate a little bit on those if he wants to just talk about how long it's taken to complete or just to get some of these projects to this point. We talked about Northeast, Southeast. That's a big chunk of this $80 million. It's 20 million of it, with another million for broadband and another million or so for infrastructure, utility infrastructure. We also have some large projects like the Santa Fe River Greenway, at a $10 million price tag right now. Agua Fria wastewater, $7.5 million. Public safety facility, which we know is being constructed, but a $6 million project. So these are some big numbers, big projects, and it takes a lot of our staff time to get them to this point, and then it also takes a lot of staff time to keep them moving and make sure we get them completed.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, the only thing I would add to what Leandro has already said, I think he did an excellent job explaining it. I think you've heard me say this before. We have some amazing staff, and there for a while we were not as productive as we would like to have been due to vacancies, COVID, supply chain issues, those kinds of things. But I think, as Leandro highlighted, some of the large projects that we've moved forward, Northeast, Southeast, public safety, the River Trail in the design stages, as well as getting additional funding from this board to hopefully take that to construction here shortly. But I think it also highlights not only is it complex to get the project through, whether it be staffing or procurement, but it's also from a financial standpoint, the costs are constantly changing. So these gaps that we've identified are not necessarily additional requests of staff or a design engineer or a contractor. These are things based on cost escalations largely that have caused a funding gap. And our hope is we've gained some great momentum with these projects and hopefully started proving ourselves on delivery of some of these projects that by filling these gaps, that we can continue to move these projects forward for the community.
Thank you for that, Brian and Leandro. And I would interject, I think, with regard to at least one project, maybe more. With regard to the Agua Fria wastewater, and Brian, if I'm getting the particulars wrong, I believe that the total funding, when you sum it all up, and that includes both anticipated bond proceeds from the county's bond sale anticipated later this summer, as well as legislative appropriations and the additional $700,000. That is estimated to allow the county to do two things. Number one, to complete the construction of the 8, I believe, sewer lines on streets that have already been designed, but also complete the design work for the next tranche of priority streets, which is, I believe, 10 that have been identified as being in the next group of priority streets. So again, it would allow us to, or should allow us to complete what's already been designed, as well as do design work that would be the basis for potential future capital allocations, either from the county or from the legislature. With regard to the additional funds shown as being part of the Northeast-Southeast Connector, those do relate to project issues that one runs into when you move forward such a huge project. The ones that I would highlight include both material cost relative to necessary dirt to actually support the roadway being constructed, being imported or removed, as well as electricity for lighting at the roundabouts were the significant ones that I can think of top of mind. And with that, I'll move on in terms of the actual spreadsheet, which I'm presenting and is on board docs as well as in your hard copy of material to the yellow projects. And
Manager Schaefer.
Please.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to ask a question about the first group for clarity. These are projects, if we filled all the funding gaps, are all of these projects, I know some of them are started, some of them are well underway. Are they all doable in real time now if we finish the funding gaps, or are some of them still not going to be started for a year or two because of staffing and other, other resource concerns?
So, Madam Chair, Commissioner Hamilton, these green projects, we're pretty confident will be able to move and get completed with the additional funding that we're requesting. Okay. These may not complete, as Manager Schaefer mentioned, Agua Fria as an example, it may not complete the entire project. It would, though, get us to a very significant phase of a completion. So that's a good example of one that you'll still see on the list for many years to come, even if you give us our gap funding, but you'll also see 8 streets that would be completed in terms of the sewer infrastructure that we're looking to do.
Yeah, but that's separate funding. I mean, that might be on next year, but what this funding is for that first phase anyway. So, and that's what the question, okay, great, thank you so much.
So, on that topic, there was ARPA money. Where is the ARPA money that we had set aside for sewers and wastewater? And has that money all been spent? We had until 2024 to spend it?
Madam Chair, I'll take the first crack at that. We still have a lot of that ARPA money available to us. It has been allocated and it's still being put into motion. It's more than just the infrastructure projects. Obviously, some was allocated for programming, but as far as I know, we still have all that available.
And if I could, Madam Chair, and Yvonne can speak to this and correct me if I'm wrong, if it's been budgeted for a specific project, it would be included in the first line that's on this spreadsheet in terms of that's budget that would be rolling forward to fiscal year 2024 and beyond in order to complete projects. Did I get that right, Yvonne?
Madam Chair, yes. The ARPA funds that were allocated 2 years ago, we've made some minor adjustments, but every year, whatever funding has not been spent continues to roll forward for those specific projects that the board approved.
So I was under the impression, I could have been wrong, that money was allocated to the Agua Fria sewer system because that money that was allowed to be spent there. And I remember specifically requesting that 2 years ago, whenever that we got the ARPA money.
And we'll confirm, Madam Chair, and I think all we're saying is that, assuming that all to be correct, it would be reflected in the $3.5 million that, or in the 968. So amounts that have already been previously been budgeted, and either have an encumbrance that's rolling forward or has not yet been encumbered under construction contracts. But we'll confirm that and get that information to you.
And then one other item on the Agua Fria project, there are at least 38 to 40 streets that need sewers. And we did do the EED preliminary engineering study that showed that, you know, there was at least 38. So even though 4 streets have been done, there's still a long ways to go. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Thanks. There was one other thing, you know, thanking phones and Google. The 2023 projection for building and cost inflation is 3.8%. It was almost 19% in 2022. So I wonder if we might add a 3.8%. I mean, it's standard to add contingency. We might add, I wonder if we might consider adding 3.8% on top of that for the 2023 inflationary costs. Just a thought, you know, you guys know how to deal with it better, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamilton. Commissioner Hughes.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking on this chart and I was wondering where the College Drive extension and also the sewer for Oshara are on this chart.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Hughes, they're not on this chart because they don't have any funding currently. I take that back. I was about to say something that's accurate as to one, but not to the other. So if you scroll down in the chart, you'll see that $2 million, and so now you should be able to see it on the screen. It's Oshara Phase 2, Arroyo Hondo de Santa Fe, wastewater to Abajo. $2 million of that project was included as a potential project in the 2022 general obligation bonds that the voters approved. They vote on questions, not on projects, but when you look at the actual project list that was put out as part of the bond process, there were $2 million allocated for that purpose. So the additional amount that would be requested is $4 million, and again, that would get you to a total project cost of approximately $6 million. So that's where Oshara Phase 2 resides. With regard to College Drive, that would be a new project. We're going to go over those recommendations in a minute, and that's a separate attachment to this presentation. I hope that answers your question,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
thank you. And also, I guess, just to point out that I think we're not that close to even the design of the sewer, because I know that there was a option to rerouted through some people's backyards, and then those people have all been calling us that they don't want it in their backyard. So I think there's, it seems like there's going to be some time spent trying to design that in a way that works for everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Thank you, Manager Schaefer. Did you have a question? I think that some of the questions that were just asked were things that were going to be addressed. So
yeah, and I'm happy to actually hold all my questions till later. I just, if we're having more time, so thank you. I'll hold them.
okay, thank you. Go ahead, Manager Schaefer and colleagues.
Great, thank you. As you go through to the projects that are again already receiving some funding and are not as I'd say close to being completion as those that are in green, there are a variety of gaps that have been identified. The significant ones that I would highlight: the Lopez Lane sidewalks. The $600,000 was for, as I understand it, really a preliminary engineering report. The 1.7 million, if that project were to move forward, would allow us to proceed with property acquisition as well as construction, if I'm not mistaken. If that project were to be funded by the board, in terms of construction, my understanding is that you would want to coordinate that with the sewer line that is also going to be installed in that street, so that you're again, doing the construction work all at one time. With regard to the San Ildefonso right-of-way, or really it's new roads in the Pueblo of San Ildefonso, I believe, and Brian can address this, this gets back to the increased costs that are substantial relative to the construction of roadways. And so project staff is anticipating not insignificant, to put it mildly, increase in the cost of actually completing those new roads. And because that is a contractual commitment, albeit one that is partially subject to appropriations, we are recommending that we start to plan for that, which we would hope to see come to fruition in the next 1 to 2 to 3 fiscal years. In the Pojoaque Basin, I've already mentioned additional funding for the regional water system, both to complete the county's share of construction costs, but also allow us to begin to better evaluate what options are for potential system interconnect, as well as other potential uses of significant capital investment to increase demand and water quality. The Abajo lift station, that is a separate project, which would actually be the project that takes wastewater from the Abajo lift station, and rather than having it go to the City of Santa Fe wastewater treatment plant at Paseo Real, the wastewater would instead go to the county's water reclamation facility on the grounds of the state penitentiary. And that additional $2 million, I believe, would allow that project to be completed. The Turquoise Trail bulk water station, that's a significant increase in cost. I believe that is stemming from a recommendation to move the actual location of the bulk water station from Turquoise Trail down the road to the fire station. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's anticipated that that will better serve the public, but also it provides an additional source of supply to our fire station so that it will no longer have to utilize a well. So that is a significant change that I wanted to highlight. And with that, I would turn it over to Leandro and to Brian if there's any additional detail that you wanted to add to any of those, which is, again, where the bulk of the additional funding that we're recommending would be going.
Madam Chair, I don't have much more to add other than to just highlight that the funding gap in this yellow tranche of projects is about $28 million at this time. That could grow. So I just point that out, as some of these are still in design, or some of these are estimates based on preliminary design. We don't know exactly what that gap amount would be, but it may grow a little bit into future years as we complete design and have a more solid number. So I just wanted to highlight that. And one more thing, just to clarify on the chart, the column that's called the 2023 legislative appropriation and bond proceeds, just for your knowledge, the blue are bond and the green are state appropriations. So a couple more colors I just forgot to clarify in the beginning.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yeah, thank you. Just on this chart, you have El Dorado roads and...
You're on the green chart.
No, I'm on the yellow.
Okay.
On the yellow chart, El Dorado road projects and Encantado Road, those can be combined because the ECIA has made Encantado Road their top priority, and that will cut down on the amount we still need to raise by a little bit by combining those two.
And Madam Chair and Commissioner Hughes, it's our understanding that ECIA was supposed to take action at their last board meeting in late May, I believe, and we haven't received confirmation to that, but that's our understanding as well, that they were moving in that direction. But we were waiting for that information to be approved by their board as a whole, and then we would be, if we weren't able to get additional funding, we would be revising the scope to see how to get as far as we can with design and construction with the existing funding we have, totaling about $1.8 million. Then this funding gap would get the entire road completed.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to wait for them to take official action. Just they've told me on several occasions that's what they're going to do, but yeah, we should make sure they do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just in continued effort to get clarity from a planning point of view, many of these yellow projects, they were separated into a separate group because of the state of funding, but many of them have been committed to for a while and maybe are only underway in terms of design, but they're kind of on the list to do, and some of them aren't lacking funding. Some of them are. I mean, I recognize there's a big gap. So I guess just the simple question is can you give us like a time frame concept for when these would be gotten to if we close some of these funding gaps compared to the green ones, which,
Madam Chair, Commissioner Hamilton, that's a good question. We have in our pipeline, and this is where I believe coordination amongst departments and process that Greg outlined earlier is key to our success. As we seek additional funding, as we start projects, we build a backlog. Right now, I believe there's $160 million worth of or somewhere in that neighborhood, a backlog of projects that are in the green, the yellow, that with current staffing, it's just not realistic to get done in a year. So what we at Public Works have done over the last couple of years is develop a top 10 priority list of those projects for each of our areas, whether it be roads, utilities, vertical, open space, and trails, to be realistic on what we can accomplish. So the green, I would say that these projects are sitting there. I want to say they're sitting there waiting to get that additional influx of money to take it to the next step, whether it be design or construction. In the near term, the yellow are some lengthier time frames. Commissioner Hughes brought up the El Dorado Roads projects in Encantado, so just sticking on that topic as an example, that's going to take hiring a design engineer, getting the design completed, and then hiring a contractor and getting the contractor completed. So hiring a design engineer and hiring a contractor, I'm using round numbers, takes anywhere from 9 to 12 months to get through procurement, and that's no disrespect the process is just advertising it, getting a bid, getting the contractor bid, reviewing the bid. Those types of things takes time and getting it funded. So a lot of these projects in the yellow, and I'm using Encantado as an example, we can pick off the west extension of Avenida Sur as an example. Similarly, needs to be designed, needs to be constructed. So every time you go to procurement, there's a period of time, and then the designer needs to design, and the contractor needs to contract or construct. So I would say that the green are within, they are to move them forward. These would be to move it forward in the near term, and depending on the construction, could be within the next 1 to 2 years from delivery of projects. Whereas the yellow, I would say some of these may move forward, but you're looking at more of a 3 to 5 year range to get some of these projects done, depending on the complexity as well as the staff and availability to get these projects moving forward.
Okay.
And if I
I'm a
could,
little-
if I could address, add on to what Brian said, the board allocated on the operating budget side of things some resources to help increase our capacity on the project front in the short term. So there are probably several different areas in which we're going to be looking to do so on a temporary basis to clear some of the backlog of these projects. The first is in the procurement arena. We'll be pursuing a e-procurement solution that should generally streamline most of our procurement processes in the next fiscal year. Over and above that, we've been discussing with Mr. Taylor contracting with higher level procurement specialists to focus specifically on projects so that we have some specific capacity on a contractual basis that is dedicated to moving some of those procurements more quickly. Secondly, I've been working with the county attorney to begin the process of contracting with a contractor, if we don't already have one in our suite of outside counsel, who specialize in construction engineering contracts. Another pinch point is the actual development of the contractual documents, be they construction contract or design professional contract, so that we're augmenting our capacity there by bringing on additional resource that can just specifically focus there. Then looking at the project management side, as we begin to work through the backlog, if we are in fact running into constraints in terms of our staff's ability to work through some of these projects, then we would be looking at potentially contracting with project management. So it's a cost, but there are potential savings if you can move the project more quickly if you bring a contractor, contract project manager on board and have them work under the general oversight of county staff, but to move those projects forward. So those are the three things that we'll be looking at in the next fiscal year to help augment our capacity to try and move through what I think you can only describe as a backlog of projects that we need to work our way through. So I would add that to Brian's description of what we'll be trying to do.
But that all totally makes sense. I think it was just seeing two things I wanted to ask about that seemed to be exceptions to me. So I was wondering, your answer made total sense in terms of having the green and then the yellow bunch. But one example is like the Hondo Bulk Water Station. So it is missing some funding. But there was also discussion about that being linked with the completion of the rest of that water line, and because and doing it as an add-on to that contract because they were already mobilized, and that the design of that was pretty close. So I was a little surprised to see it here instead of in the green. Now maybe things have changed. I'm not necessarily presenting it as a problem, but Manager Schaefer mentioned linking the water line and the sewer line and another road project, and this was something I thought there there had been some decisions or thinking in utilities to link that to the existing construction. And then similarly, or differently, technically, there's the water rights acquisition, which is not only not missing any money, any funding level, but that's technically not a construction project. And that hit me when I saw it there as something that I don't know how much priority, it's toward the bottom of the list, how much priority no, not priority, how much urgency there is, but that seems like something that in terms of future development might be something that would be outside of this ranking system. So that is why I asked the questions, because based on my other assumptions, you would think there would be priority to thinking about filling in funding gaps in the green first and then in the yellow. But I wondered if there were other exceptions like that might not follow the timelines you just estimated.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Hamilton, to just speak very briefly on the Hondo Bulk Water Station, you're correct. We're always looking for synergies with projects. This project, one, the contractor is no longer on site, but as we worked through some of the details, we were coordinating with the fire chief and his staff. So from access to the building, we also have the county owns property there where the fire station is, but then outside of that, we're in a DOT right away. So we're working with DOT on an airspace lease for that parcel so that we can be in compliance with their requirements for having structures within that area. So there were some complications to that. From a pure design standpoint, we are in the process of moving that forward on the design standpoint. And the nice thing about whether it be the Hondo Bulk Water Station, the Turquoise Trail, or the Turquoise Trail Bulk Water Station, we can get some synergies with the design from the standpoint of type of equipment we use, because we would want spare parts that are consistent, those types of things. So there are some synergies that we're always looking at, but there were some complexities with that site that slowed the project down.
Okay, well then that clarifies, because it was a great idea that would have put it further along and in the green, except that things didn't work out the way they were hoped to. So that makes sense. And so now the difference between the green and the yellow seem pretty consistent, with the possible exception of the water rights thing, which seems to be separate, but that's fine. But so thank you. I'm much more clear now.
Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Greg, Leandro, and Brian, and Yvonne. First off, I want to give you a shout out for focusing on capacity, right? We've had this conversation a few times, and we need to ramp up our capacity for the next few years, because the money's here, and I see a big long project list. And so if we're not going for it and getting these jobs done, from going out and getting the money and getting them into the cycle and getting them built, that's great. So I appreciate the flexibility and how you're looking at this in that proactive way. On the list here, I'll go one project that I didn't know about that seems better funded than I thought it was, which is the Camino Chupadero project up there. And I know we had been asking for some money at the legislature, but it appears that we didn't need it. And so I'm wondering what the status of that is. And there's a few little add-ons to that I think are in the broadband area that I'd love to hear about, but or are probably not included now, but at least in the future could be. But if you could update me on Camino Chupadero, that would be great. Maybe not now, or maybe right now, or yeah.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Green, I thought you said not now. At a future date, I update you, so apologize. Camino Chupadero, we have $3.5 million in bond funding as part of the November past bond election. That money will be used for design and construction. So we have existing 750. The 3.5 gets us to a fully constructed project. We have not started design of that drainage, those drainage improvements and the roads. repaving for that area. We have done some interim fixes to temporarily solve some of the drainage issues along that corridor, because we have not been able to get the design started and move that project forward. So that's why it's in the yellow. Right now, from a staffing standpoint and staff capacity standpoint, with existing staff that we have, we do not have the capacity to move that forward. But as some projects get completed and come out of design and go into construction, and we have some capacity, we would definitely, it's on our list because it is fully funded.
Okay, great. Thank you. So then going to more in the future, and I don't know where, obviously they may not have fallen onto this at this point, but just discussion of knowing that within the next year or two, there's going to be these FLAP grants, Federal Lands Access Program grants, and there are 4 potential projects that I've identified so far, and I'm sure there's plenty more. But one is Buckman Road to Diablo Canyon, which happens to be the line in between Commissioner Hansen's and my district, and has need for bettering the road, need for broadband and for public safety down the road, and potential trails and parking areas and access plans, and something right along aligned with the FLAP grants. And so the idea would be that if we're planning for fiscal year 25 right now, we could do a little bit of seed funding to scope out the project and be ready for applying for a FLAP grant there. Second potential FLAP grant is on the Chimayo pilgrimage route. This was brought up to me by the BLM, that they needed, that they saw some upgrades that they would support around the Santa Cruz Lake area, and as well as dovetails to some work that we're looking, that some constituents have discussed up in the Chimayo area. And again, this is a FLAP, this was what the BLM said was a perfect FLAP grant in their opinion. So being able to prepare so that we had the documentation ready to go for that would be great to be included in there as well. And then sort of dovetailing with and timing being of the essence here and being prepared, we have, we're going to, following our own edict of a Dig Once project, if we're going to be putting in waters, sewer, roads, and stuff up in the Pewaukee Valley for the Amet settlement, we have an opportunity with federal broadband money to put in conduit alongside of this. And so part of this goes to making it very clear to the BOR that we would like to do this, and that we will provide the funding to gap that in, but that they need to include it in their designs for all the distribution lines as they go in over the next few years. And so having that, A, on our radar to start collecting money for that, but B, also making sure that we reach out to the BOR and include that in their design specifications for as they're building that. Lastly, I've heard from a few people, all over the county talking about how county facilities really need some broadband just on those buildings out, whether it's a senior center, an election location, whatever, the county things. The senior programs need access control, and they need, all of our buildings need security cameras, and we could provide public Wi-Fi or sort of library functions at all of these facilities. And I know broadband and fiber will take a long time, but we don't need to make the good the enemy of the perfect. And we could probably put in with Dish, with fixed wireless to a local service provider, enough broadband to these facilities to get us through the next election cycle, to get us to have new control systems for these projects. And so when we have, whether it's the Abdon Lopez project up in Santa Cruz or up in Rio and Medio, if we put a dish up on top of those buildings, we would be able to control it with a smartphone, as opposed to have to find the person with the keys at 6 o'clock at night when there's some event and you can't figure those things out. So I would put those 4 projects on this as sort of seed funding to get these things initiated. I appreciate this. I know a constituent from Commissioner Hughes's district mentioned a dog park, and we talked about it on the road the other day. And rumor has it the landowner out there is willing to give the land to a dog park. And I've seen the happiness on people's face when they have a dog park in their neighborhood. So I know Commissioner Hughes will be happy to see that on his constituents' face.
Thank you, Commissioner Green, but I think we should allow staff to finish their presentation before adding on more stuff.
I'm done, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll just complete the high-level overview as we go, further down in terms of relative. I don't want to say priority. I would say it's more accurate to say, project development and other factors. So again, I don't want to use the priority, but just in terms of reasonable anticipation. For example, the Thornton Ranch open space is obviously a priority for the county, but when you factor in all of the consultation that is yet to be completed, as well as thinking about designing facilities in order for that open space to move forward, you're looking at multiple years out before you're going to make a significant dent in that. Nonetheless, there were a few gaps that have already been identified that the projects team were recommending that we go ahead and attempt to fill at this point, even recognizing that there will be potential for those gaps to grow in the future. I defer any questions on that score to Brian and Leandro. But as we go forward to the red projects, these are projects that, as Leandro indicated, we're potentially on the verge of closing out, and relatively small dollar amounts will be available for reallocation to other projects, or they were funded by the legislature, and they might not have been our priorities, but we have received legislative funding for them. So the animal shelter at $510,000 would be one such project that was on the ICIP but did not rank highly in terms of county projects. $400,000 for the El Dorado pathway, which again, if I'm not mistaken, was another project that was not on a priority list for the county, but those are highlighted in this group, and again, we can answer any questions about that, but I wanted to explain where those large dollar figures were coming from.
Madam Chair, if I could just add one more thing. Some of these El Dorado, I think to Commissioner Hughes' point, we're going to be combining them into one so that we could do one big project out there. So they're not necessarily dead or closed. I think there's a large amount you see on the pathway or the trails. I think the purpose of them being red is so that we combine them together and figure out what that big project's going to be and then put all the sources toward that. Thank you.
So I also see on the red we have Lopez Lane. So that 9 million, we could move up to working on the road and sidewalks, and or is that just road repair? Of 9,000? Okay. I'm sorry, I'd like it to be 9 million. So just being honest.
Madam Chair, to that point, there's also, trying to pull this spreadsheet back up, but you have Caja del Oro, Agua Fria, and Lopez Lane. That project, that paving project and striping project is largely complete. However, there's some sections of the road that have failed. So what we have done is we've withheld money from the contractor till that project's complete. Once that project's complete, to our testing standards, then we'll pay the contractor, and whatever money's left over will go back towards 2 other projects. So that the money is held up right now in a purchase order to that we're withholding from the contractor till the road is complete to our liking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. The next document that I wanted to share related to current and proposed maintenance projects. Again, I think these are relatively straightforward, but did want to review them with the board in terms of staff recommendations for both existing and new projects. So I'm now broadcasting and will endeavor to make larger a list of those projects. Again, for the most part, the additional funding is what we are highlighting, as well as the new potential project. I mentioned previously we are going to be undertaking a study relative to a countywide facility assessment. We're proposing to add $25,000 to that. It might not be the same contractor, but that would be for the the space assessment and analysis for the First Judicial District Court. We also have an existing maintenance project to address concrete and planter issues at the First Judicial District Court. And in terms of significant additional projects, that's fuel pump repairs, as well as the maintenance of our public safety housing units in our various housing communities. And then finally, I mentioned the general contingency and minor unanticipated projects set aside. So the sum total of new funds is approximately $775,000. And when you add that to existing funding, you're looking at approximately $1.8 million would be budgeted for those purposes in fiscal year 2024 based upon staff's recommendations. Be happy to answer any questions relative to maintenance projects before I move on.
Okay. Next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next, and this is going to be exceedingly difficult to read, and I apologize for that in advance. You do have a hard copy in your physical binder. I'm sorry. Okay, let me. I will see if I can shrink it down to make it a little bit more visible, or else Yvonne will hand out reading glasses and magnifying glasses.
If you have a computer that works, you know, I haven't been able to open any attachments for a while. Maybe I did try and close everything out. Maybe things will have changed. And I'm happy you got yours to work, Commissioner. Mine. I haven't had really access for a couple meetings. Wait, I don't get the attachments. I have the hard copy.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, hopefully this will be a little bit larger for everybody to view. This is the scoring sheet relative to new projects. I believe they're generally grouped by department and not ranked in terms of their score. But we have two projects from community development and sustainability. There's a bit of overlap with some of the EV stuff, but ultimately looking beyond the specific descriptions to the overall purpose, these would be amounts of funds or monies that could be available to support further energy conservation as well as water conservation and energy efficiency at existing county facilities, and potentially additional augmentations to those facilities in terms of solar upgrades and the like. So a significant amount of money to support those efforts. For the housing meter bases replacement, I believe that's part of the congressionally directed funding, if I'm not mistaken, in the request, and we're optimistic that that will be funded through that mechanism, which is why it's not highlighted in green. We discussed the various project corrections, which will provide, as needed, a safe space for our canines, as well as a fence around the staff gym building, and complete the installation of food ports to enable us to run a more secure facility. The transfer development right survey plats already mentioned. The growth management project and open space for floodplain restoration. Two things I would note is that there's existing funding of approximately $100,000 to do some initial design work and assessments for a larger project, which would again lay the groundwork for a future potential capital request, either through the legislature or through our own internal processes. In addition, Leandro has been working with the federal government to assess various projects that may be eligible for federal funding, and this might be one such project as well. So I wanted to spend a minute talking about that. We've briefly touched upon the College Drive extension, and I want to spend a few more minutes discussing that concept, as well as the P25 Public Safety Radio Network. This would be the county replacing its existing end-of-life analog system with digital radio, most likely through the statewide public safety radio system. But these are the initial cost that would cover the anticipated cost this next fiscal year. And again, that's a much larger project that could ultimately be in the $10 to $17 million range, depending upon whether the county invests in new additional towers to support more robust public safety radio communications. We talked about the PER for the Tesuque Valley Wastewater Treatment Facility. And again, we've looked and spoke with the chief. The La Pueblo Station 1 burn building, while isn't a must-have, and that's why we're not recommending that we fund it at this particular time. But I'd be happy to answer any specific questions that you have relative to how we looked at this list of potential new projects. And then again, I want to ask Leandro and Brian to spend a few minutes just making sure we're all thinking about the College Drive extension from the same premises in terms of what it means to not only potential development in the area, but also to relieve traffic congestion and failure on Richards Avenue.
So Madam Chair, Commissioners, I'm going to ask Matt if you put up the map. I think he was ready to present the map, but we have a map of the northeast, southeast area so we could show a little bit better and demonstrate what we're asking for in the College Drive extension. And if we can't get that up, I have a paper, good old-fashioned paper map as well. There it is. So this is probably bigger than that. I mean, you could see that, but you can get the gist of it from what's up on your screen. The community college starts College Drive, and it extends to a certain point. It just disappeared. The map itself, can you still see it on your screens?
No,
It went away.
it went white. Oh, here we
Okay,
go.
there it is. So the map itself shows a little, like a dirt road. You see a right angle. That isn't exactly the extension of College Drive, but just below that and on the southeast connector, you can see where it extends out. There's a T intersection there to try to get you familiar with the other side of the College Drive extension. College Drive does go a little ways already, and we're just proposing connecting it from what's existing to the southeast connector. We also talked about including conduit for broadband and the water line, as Manager Schaefer had mentioned earlier.
So the one thing that I would highlight, it relates both to new development, but also maximizing the return on the investment in the Northeast-Southeast connector, is without the extension of College Drive, all of the community college related traffic and all of the traffic associated with the both the church as well as the elementary school that is to the west of College Drive. Without the extension of College Drive, all of the traffic associated with those two fairly large uses, in particular the community college, will north to the community college, or perhaps it comes over off of Rabbit Road onto Richards at the new interchange or roundabout with Dinosaur Trail. But ultimately, you're still going to have all of that traffic on that section of Richards Avenue. Extending College Drive would help alleviate that to a not insignificant extent because now folks would have a secondary or another primary access point into the community college that would allow them to bypass Richards Avenue altogether. So again, you could take the southeast connector to the College Drive and then use the existing entrance on the north side of the community college that you can take off of College Drive. So that would be point number one that investment would have in terms of return on that investment for the community. Secondly, as part of this project, what would be included would be the extension of a water line or the construction of a water line that would run from the southeast connector, and Brian, if I'm getting it wrong, correct me, over to College Drive, and it would complete a loop for the utility system for our water infrastructure that would provide greater redundancy to the area, but also allow us to better circulate the water for water quality purposes. Finally, what the county construction of that or extension of that county road could facilitate is the development of a previously approved multifamily development that is just to the east of the existing development in the area. As leaving aside the cost for the water line and the conduit, just the cost of the road itself, I believe we're estimating to be in the order of magnitude of about $3.3 million, with a contingency that gets you up to $3.5 million. If we look to that development to build that infrastructure, what has been represented to the county is that at least at those prices, it's not going to occur. In other words, that development won't move forward and the connection itself won't happen. So to sum up, The rationale for the College Drive extension is to maximize the return for the community on the investment in the Northeast-Southeast connector by providing further relief on Richards Avenue, by providing a additional access point for the community college that would bypass Richards Avenue, as well as providing another potential access point to the church adjacent to College Drive and the private elementary school that is there. It would also serve the additional purpose of providing a looped water system for the utility division. And finally, it's anticipated that it will help facilitate the construction of much needed, previously approved multifamily housing in that area. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about the College Drive extension before we move on to the wastewater line in the community college district.
And Madam Chair,
Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, I think that apartment building was approved before my time. Is it affordable housing, or is it just market rate housing?
Madam Chair, I understand it to be market rate housing. And I do have some numbers attached to that that might give you an idea of the additional potential revenue for the county. Just the project itself is a $46 million project. Our county portion of GRT would be a 2% in the county area. That would equate to just under $1 million, $920,000 in just GRT from the project. Future property taxes potentially up to $330,000 annually from the project. So you can see that the investment in College Drive with this one development alone would likely pay for itself within 10 years.
Thank you. I think that I'm just wondering if we would have an opportunity to revisit the affordable housing aspect of the project if we're going to invest $3 million in making it possible. It seems to me that just to invest our money and create only market rate housing, you know, that part doesn't appeal to me that much, I guess. I understand all the rest of it, and I know the college really wants that entrance into the college, so that's all good.
So just FYI, this project was approved by the board in 2016, before Commissioner Hamilton and I were on the board, but I remember the meeting because I was at it and I testified on that project. So I know that it happened in 2016. Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Brian and Leandro, for sharing this road project. I get the concept of trying to do it all at the same time, and I'm a big fan of solving two problems with one mobilization. So I think that cost savings is a great benefit. But back to the concerns of Commissioner Hughes, is the affordability and the sort of, large apartment buildings are not built typically by local developers. They're usually built by out-of-state, financed by Wall Street. And, if this is an infeasible project at that sort of model, there could be the same density built in a variety of mechanisms that might be more appropriate for this area. And so, I don't want to, it's an 8-year-old project at this point. We should probably look at it, and I didn't know that these projects don't sunset. Are they like in perpetuity? Or, so these approvals, we need to be careful and probably put sunsets on some approvals if that's the case.
So it was contingent on us building this road and getting the southeast-northeast connector done, and that they couldn't build it until we completed our part, which is, as Brian Snyder said, 10 years ago, the Northeast Connector would have cost us probably $8 million. Unfortunately, at that point, New Mexico DOT did not want to help us at all and actually withdrew $3 million. So you know, things have evolved and changed over the time. And
I mean, along the lines of the apartments, it is my understanding that apartments are not necessarily filling up in Santa Fe, right? It is not the housing stock. We need housing, but there's different flavors of housing. And I don't think that, you know, I don't know for sure, but I know the 5 of us up here do not live in apartments in Santa Fe. And I went to an architectural and housing group, and then I asked the architects who were saying, we need apartments. And I was like, how many of you live in apartments? So it is some of it is unaffordable. It is not the quality of life that people are looking for in Santa Fe. And so I'm in for apartments when they're appropriate, but if they're, we should address that, and especially the affordability aspect to it.
thank you, Commissioner Hamilton.
So I understand the basis for several of those thoughts, but first of all, I mean, affordable housing should be incredibly high on our priority list. That doesn't mean every single project has to be focused in that direction. And there is also this bigger picture of economic development. And frankly, this question is about something that was approved a while ago and has tremendous economic development, as Leandro just pointed out, potential benefits. But there are some failings to the way business as usual in the county in terms of having all infrastructure developer driven, so that if it doesn't make economic sense to put the cost of infrastructure, which in many other places where high density development is more common, like the East Coast, it is put in by the municipality or the county or the city or whatever, and that encourages development. I mean, there are a lot of ways to encourage economic development. So this is an area where we have, through long planning that, you know, frankly occurred before Commissioner Hanson and I were on the board, with the idea of what was, you know, environmentally sound planning, encouraging cluster development in one area. This is a way of following through logically on that plan and putting in infrastructure that allows that kind of development in a way that makes sense. Frankly, putting infrastructure in would allow affordable housing development in a much more rational way as well. But the idea of rethinking the approval of a project a few years later because they weren't able to start because we haven't put something in is unacceptable. That is just not the way to do business. That is not the kind of thing this county ought to think about doing. Here, you guys can develop here. Oh, well, we think we'd rather do something else now. That's not acceptable.
Madam Chair, I agree that if we were on the hook for it, yeah, then we're on the hook for it.
Mic is not on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so as somebody who has worked in the community college district for years and years and has been involved in this project, I do see the benefit of putting in College Drive because I see the connections that can be made. I also see that, you know, talking to the developer and looking at the land around it of what kind of projects we can put in that are affordable, but at the same time, I know that it is much wiser to put in a road before there are constituents living there than it is to try and do it afterwards. And I'm just making a probably very logical point. So I do see the benefit of doing this. I do also see the benefit of doing this for the community college. And I would think that these apartments would possibly be occupied by college students, even at market rate, you know. It's unknown who would actually, you know, we can't project. But I think having the discussion is important, but I also, as I've said up here many, many times, I love roads and I love road networks. And I think that this is a logical road network to undertake. So I'll leave it there for the moment. Commissioner Hughes wants to say something. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
just a couple things. One is that we're not the ones reopening this. Their agreement was that they would build College Drive to the apartments as part of their approval. And so they're asking us to reconsider. And so I think if they're asking us to reconsider that part, you know, that opens it up a little bit. And I don't know that we would change very much. You know, I agree that not all apartment buildings have to be affordable. I think what I was saying is that the sewer line that we were also talking about building would go by the Dominium apartment proposal, and those are supposed to be affordable because they're going to use 4% tax credits to build them. And I would say, I'm just more excited about those. and I guess I would just like to know, who are they going to market these apartments to? And unfortunately, there are people who live on College Drive who are going to talk to me about this. They live on the part that's already built, not the part we're going to build. But every time a flag goes up out there, they call me and say, what's that? What are they building now? And so I would like to have a good answer for them, like, oh, these are going to be apartments that are marketed to college students, or these are going to be, you know, this or that. So I don't know. I think it's worth at least figuring out what it is who it is we're helping, if we're going to help with the apartments. Thank you.
Chair. Yes.
Madam Chair, in the interest of
Commissioner Bustamante.
really addressing the issue of college students, and it was my experience that we had students literally living in their cars right behind the college. I'm just throwing it out that if it's plausible, maybe they want to create dorms, and they would be privately owned dorms, but I don't see college students at Santa Fe Community College being able to afford, unless you had, you know, multiple students in one small apartment, but at today's rates. But I just want to put that out there, since we have brought out college students. Many were not able to live in the city proper. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bustamante. It's also 4:57. So I wonder where we are at and how much longer we want to go, if we want to do a little bit more and take a break. I know we have been talking about meeting again on Friday. A few of us have obligations on Friday, and maybe possibly we could meet on Monday afternoon, but I don't know what the rest of the commission, where they are at with that.
So, Madam Chair, Commissioners, we'll be pleased to accommodate the board's schedule in whatever way is necessary, whether it be a different time on Friday or Monday. In terms of today's presentation, I believe the last thing that we wanted to provide was some additional information relative to the main wastewater trunk line through the community college, and then we would again stand for any final questions, but that was going to wrap up what we were going to present today. And again, we're not asking for any direction from the board, though we'd be pleased to hear any comments that you want to add.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
At the end, could we also get, I know this might be putting you guys on the spot, but like a really brief summation of what we got presented today? Like, here's how much we have to spend, and here are the major, you know, like the 37 seconds worth of summation.
They might, I don't know if they have that, but.
They may not, but, you know, a little bit.
But maybe we could have that the first thing on Monday or.
What I could do, and what I indicated, thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner Hamilton, is we will sum that up and we'll provide that to you by the end of the day tomorrow, so you can actually, you know, see it in writing. But I think if that would be useful.
So
yeah, thanks so much.
Can we find out if Monday at 3 p.m. works for people instead of Friday?
That works for me.
Yes, it works for me as well.
Madam Chair as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if we could move the next session to Monday, Monday at 3 p.m. I don't have a date. The 26th.
We will notice that accordingly. Thank you again, commissioners, for your flexibility.
I think just a number of us have things happening on Friday.
So the last, again, piece of information that we wanted to provide related to the proposed main wastewater line through the community college district, which would be part of the county's backbone infrastructure. And what should be displayed shortly is a map of that wastewater line. And Matthew, I'm attempting to override you, but if you could, so this is, again, an overview of what the wastewater line looks like. And I think to Commissioner Hamilton's point, it kind of proves up some of the challenges when you have developer-driven infrastructure being your primary source of infrastructure build-out in an area as large as even the community college. And so beginning on the right-hand side of the map, there are two potential locations shown here relative to the actual wastewater line, but for purposes of discussion, it runs from Richards Avenue to the west. It would allow for connection to the existing Oshara Phase 1 subdivision should they choose to make that connection in the future and get out of the wastewater treatment business. It would also allow for potential future connection by the existing La Pradera subdivision, again, should they also choose to get out of the wastewater treatment business in the future. Finally, it would run down to the south and continue west by the existing Turquoise Trail Business Park over to the Colibri subdivision, where I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the wastewater would ultimately flow through Colibri to the Abajo lift station and then out to our water reclamation facility. So that's an overview of that infrastructure, and as I alluded to in the PowerPoint presentation, connecting to county water and sewer is required in SDA 1. And if that project that is just outlined, again, the total cost is in the neighborhood of approximately $6 million all told. That's a significant amount of off-site infrastructure for one development to potentially front, even if there is the possibility for future recoupment against subsequent development. If those costs are spread out across even just the Oshara subdivision, Phase 2, the Arroyo de Hondo, I believe you're looking at in excess of $11,000 almost per lot in terms of off-site infrastructure that will need to be provided to make that connection. If the county were to provide those public facilities, part of the cost would be recouped from any future subdivisions of Oshara that are actually built out through utility expansion charges. Probably a closer approximation of their actual usage. But the county would also be able to recoup some of that upfront investment from any future connections that are made either from existing developments such as La Pradera and Asharo Phase 1, but again, other subdivisions that may connect to that core infrastructure in the future. And I would highlight for Commissioner Hughes's point in terms of what becomes more possible and more feasible, the more core, and I want to emphasize that point, the more core public facilities that the county provides in our designated growth area, is that in this area of the community college district, which is to the northwest of New Mexico Highway 14 and of the Turquoise Trail Business Park across from Rancho Viejo Boulevard, there are not only one, but potentially two fully affordable housing, multifamily tax credit properties that are being developed or are at various stages of development in that area. Their cost of infrastructure is substantially reduced if the wastewater line that they need to run simply is across that street to this backbone wastewater line that we're talking about at this point, as opposed to constructing not insignificant amounts of lineal feet to go to the Bajo lift station. So again, those are two projects that have been discussed with our growth management department that are affordable housing projects and tax credit housing, but the overall principle is demonstrated by, again, county investment in such core infrastructure makes the overall cost of development less, and therefore makes the likelihood that development will occur greater at a reduced cost to the home buyers, all other things being equal. So be pleased to answer any questions, but did want to provide this visual representation of the specific wastewater line that we're talking about.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yeah, I just wondered what you think the time frame, if we were to approve it, would be for constructing the sewer line.
So look to Brian. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the planning documents are at approximately 90 to 95%. So we're pretty close to having a full-blown set of construction drawings. So those would need to be completed, and then we would need to go through whatever procurement process is necessary. I believe that, if I'm not mistaken, the right-of-way acquisition has already been undertaken by the developer, so that's not a critical path item. Those easements and real property interests could be turned over to the county to the extent they have not already been dedicated to the county through previous subdivisions. So those are a lot of words, but I would imagine to actually move forward as contemplated, by that subdivision, you would be looking at a 1 to 2 year time frame.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Hughes, I believe that's the case as well. This is largely developer driven, so timeframes are a little bit different or a little bit out of our control, but our understanding, as Greg said, is they're about 90% design. They have two alternatives, the green and the magenta route, with easements already acquired. And in the populated area that Commissioner Hughes, you were referencing earlier, it's my understanding that existing 15-foot wide easements exist along those properties that would be utilized for this infrastructure if they were to go that route. But to Greg's point, I think we're about 1 year to 2 years out.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Manager Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. So again, I will endeavor to produce the summary sheet by the end of the day tomorrow, so you have that as you plan for our next meeting on Monday. But I think leaving aside again the public safety pots of money and radio projects and such, I think when you sum it all up, there's about $12 million of existing and anticipated resources in fiscal year 24 that would be available for additional potential appropriation should the board decide to do so. So that's my summary figure, but I'll break it out by specific pots of money and specific projects to you by the end of the day tomorrow. And that's all we had.
Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question regarding the youth detention facility and where that falls on a redevelopment plan. I think I've heard from commissioners that there is a master plan for that facility, and I know that we have money to remodel for the clerk over there, for the clerk's warehouse, and senior services. Just wondering where that is in terms of funding and what that kind of looks like as a master plan and timing and use constraints and needs. And I don't expect that answer today, but that could be certainly on Monday or anytime you feel like providing that to me. That'd be great. Thank you.
Anything else from anyone? Okay. Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Hughes, second from Commissioner Green.
Other way around, but that's
Oh,
fine.
I'm sorry, a motion from Commissioner Green, second from Commissioner Hughes. We will reconvene on Monday at 3 p.m.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thanks.